Alrighty, I'm gonna start letting people in to the meeting. If you guys can just start welcoming people. Welcome in, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Just showing some pictures from the event last week as we get everybody into the meeting here. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And Ian, when you're ready, you can go ahead and take it away.
All right, thanks, Lisa. Hi, everyone. My name is Ian Swanson. I'm the managing editor of The Hill. Welcome to Open Mic. This is the second open mic I'm involved with, and I'm really excited to be here because we're going to be talking about the first ever Hill Nation Summit that took place just more than a week ago. It was a really exciting moment for us at The Hill. We teamed up with our partners at NewsNation to do a one-day conference of sorts that featured interviews with Democrats, Republicans, administration officials on the first 6 months of Trump's presidency, how his policies are changing the nation, what's going on right now in Washington, as well as how the Democratic Party can return to power potentially in the next year or so when we get to the midterms next year. So we tried to examine the big themes of the day with guests like Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, with Democratic senators like Amy Klobuchar, with former Speaker Kevin McCarthy, and a host of other people. Julia Manchester is a national political reporter at The Hill. You're probably familiar with her work at The Hill as well as her appearances on NewsNation. I'm also joined by Michael Schnell, who's one of the Hill's congressional reporters. She focuses on the House. Both of them are great experts on politics, and we're excited to turn this into a discussion where we take as many questions as we can from the people who are here today. I'm going to start with a couple questions about both the summit and hopefully some bigger themes that are going on in politics today that we got into a little bit at the summit. As I said earlier, this was a look at Trump's first 6 months in power. For Trump, those 6 months have been pretty successful, I think, so far. He's gotten a lot of what he wanted to get done through administration actions, through legislation, particularly the big, beautiful bill that passed just a week or two before we held the summit. On foreign policy, he also had some successes, including the strikes on Iran recently, and that's been a part of his efforts to try to reshape the Middle East. At the same time, I feel like he's kind of going into the August recess now. I say August recess because the House left for its August break last night, and the Senate will follow them in a couple of weeks. This is typically a slow time in Washington, and it kind of feels like Trump, Julia and Michael, is moving into this time period where he's been really strong, but now all of a sudden he's got some problems because his poll numbers aren't that great. And this Jeffrey Epstein controversy, which we talked about a bit at the summit, he just can't get away from it. And it's caused chaos in the House as well. Julia, I want to ask you first, how strong do you think Trump is going into the break? Where does he stand at the 6 month mark in your view? What's going right? What's going wrong? And how worried should he be about some of these polls right now?
I think he should absolutely be worried. And, it might seem like it's cliche to say, but quite frankly, it's the top story right now in Washington and much of the country. It's this Jeffrey Epstein case. And I bring it up because it's so unique to the president, because I think throughout his entire career in politics, going back to 2015 when he first announced he was running, we haven't seen his conservative MAGA base split the way it is right now. I mean, I even remember the days after the January 6th attack on the Capitol, where he was facing some criticism from Republicans. His base was still relatively united, but we're seeing with a number of these polls that there's a significant amount of splintering there. I don't know if they're necessarily directing this directly at Trump. I think for now, there's a lot of frustration with figures like Attorney General Pam Bondi or Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche. However, the real warning signs for Trump should come when a lot of this rhetoric starts to turn on him, if they do, start pointing him out in particular on a consistent basis. And when I say they, I mean his conservative base, a number of these online conservative MAGA influencers that have really come to shape, I think, the discussion surrounding MAGA world. I think on top of that, moving away from the Epstein, I'll stay with the Epstein stuff for a second. You have Democrats trying to take advantage of that divide within the GOP and broadening it, because poll numbers also show that a majority of Americans or respondents aren't necessarily happy with how the Trump administration has handled this. So they're trying to blow this out into an even bigger issue. It's been interesting listening to rhetoric from Republicans in the House and the Senate, Democrats in the House and the Senate on this, essentially saying, Trump is looking to protect millionaires or the elite class. In a way, I mean, I don't know if I guess you could say maybe they're trying to make this an economic issue. And then when we move to the economy, look, Trump campaigned on lowering costs, lowering inflation. We're still seeing inflation is relatively, it hasn't gone down to pre-COVID levels or where Trump wants it to be. So that's a frustration to him. I think you're seeing his frustrations aired also when it comes to, the pressure he's trying to put on Fed Chair Jerome Powell to lower interest rates, because that would likely benefit Trump when it comes, to the political conversations surrounding the economy. So I think he is in a bit of a weak spot now. But I think really a major part of that is the Epstein files.
It feels weird to be thinking of him as being in a weak spot, Michael, just given, I mean, again, you can't argue with polls. Polls show that he's underwater. But boy, it's been a pretty good first 6 months coming from a Trump perspective so far, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that anyone ever expected that at this juncture, 6 months in, after Republicans having defied expectations and enacting that big, beautiful bill ahead of the July 4th deadline, after getting that rescissions package over the finish line, there were a lot of questions and concerns about clawing back that $9 billion in foreign aid and public broadcasting, that we would be talking about President Trump being in a tough position. But this Jeffrey Epstein controversy has really thrown him a curveball that Republicans don't seem to be able to know how to address. I've been seeing it firsthand up close in the House over the past 2 weeks. You mentioned that they left last night. That was a day earlier than planned. And the reason why they cut short the week was because of this Epstein controversy. The House was unable to pass any substantive legislation through regular order this week because the Rules Committee, which is a very powerful key part of the legislative process, was in a state of paralysis because of this Epstein saga. So what's really fascinating about this current moment is that President Trump, through every iteration of his really political life, has had the MAGA base on his side. He has been driven in part by the MAGA base that's propelled him in a number of tough situations. The interesting part right now is that he is at odds with the MAGA base. President Trump wants to move on from the Jeffrey Epstein saga. The base does not want to. So that's why it's a really interesting moment for some of these Republicans up on Capitol Hill. Do they choose aligning themselves with President Trump or listening to the concerns of their constituents? We saw that all play out this week, and now Johnson may have tried to quell the controversy by cutting the week short and starting recess a day early. But I'm hearing from a number of lawmakers on both sides of the aisle that this controversy is not going to subside over the August recess. In fact, one is even suggesting that it's going to increase come September. So certainly a difficult moment for President Trump right now. And I think what makes it even more difficult is there's no real end in sight when you talk about this Jeffrey Epstein saga.
Take us behind the curtain a little bit, Michael. I mean, I know you guys got these guys on speed dial and stuff, and they're telling you stuff all the time. How worried are your average House Republicans about this whole thing? Do they really think this is a problem for them? Do they really think it's a problem for Trump?
I spoke to Congressman Tim Burchett, Republican from Tennessee. He is a very strong ally of President Trump's, and he's in a very safe red district. And he told me last week, mind you, Ian, this was last week at the beginning of this Epstein saga really blowing up, that his phone in his office was ringing off the hook with constituent concerns, voter concerns about how the administration had been handling the Epstein situation, frustrated that they haven't gotten the full breadth of information. And what Burchett pointed out to me, which he sort of said was more significant even than the constituent calls to underscore the current moment, he was getting phone calls from personal friends, which they never really do, to call and complain about the handling of how the administration has approached the Epstein files. So people are calling, the phones are ringing off the hook. This is a real concern. I think part of it is that President Trump, and by trickling down from there, Republican candidates had ran on exposing the Epstein files. They ran on publishing these pieces of information. So it seems like right now a lot of their constituents are holding their feet to the fire and still demanding. So yeah, this is not just something that folks are wanting to talk about. They are really getting phone calls in their offices about frustration from constituents with how this is being handled, and an urgency to see those documents, which is why we're seeing that being translated on Capitol Hill to members trying to force votes, defying President Trump, subpoenaing for the files and for testimony from Ghislaine Maxwell. It has really blown up, and I think that's been driven by the concerns that members are hearing from their constituents.
You interviewed Byron Donalds, and this came up last week at the Hill Nation Summit. Donalds is a congressman from Florida, rising star in his party, could be the next governor of Florida, maybe. Was there anything he said about this that surprised you, and how, I don't know, how much does the Epstein controversy and Trump's standing affect someone like Donald, who, like I said, is a rising star, who might be the next governor of Florida, but he's got to win that race, and he doesn't want something to get in his way.
Yeah, and so that's the sort of the difficult part, that Donalds has to walk the fine line. We didn't get to the Epstein controversy. We were focusing on other things like Powell, which, by the way, he said that it's not time for Jerome Powell to be fired, even though President Trump has certainly been flirting with that. In fact, it was just the day before our summit that he had a group of House Republicans in his office, and he polled them, and he said, should we fire Jerome Powell? The lawmakers said yes. And President Trump indicated that he actually planned to do that. Even after that, Byron Donalds said he still didn't think Jerome Powell should be fired. So an interesting dynamic. But when you talk about the Epstein situation in Donalds, this I think is going to be similar for a lot of other Republicans who are running for higher office or even running for re-election in their districts. Again, it's this fine line of having to handle placating President Trump and his interest in burying this story, but also listening to the concerns of constituents. How do you walk that line? How do you still get the president's endorsement, but cross him on a very key issue, which is something that constituents are looking for answers on? I think Republicans were sort of breathing a sigh of relief of the fact that this blew up right before recess. Again, lawmakers are going to be out of town for 5 weeks. They're not returning to session in the House until September 2nd. That is a while away. However, again, I'm hearing from a lot of Republicans and Democrats who say they are not going to relent on this issue. Thomas Massie, he's co-leading that legislation to compel the publication of these documents with Ro Khanna. Thomas Massie, of course, a Republican from Kentucky, no fan of President Trump's, but still somebody who was a hardcore conservative. He has this obscure mechanism called a discharge petition. That's a way to circumvent leadership and force legislation to the floor. That will become ripe, as we say. It'll be ready for action in September, which means there's going to be a live football in September on this issue. It's simply not going away. I've heard from Democrats who say they will continue to force votes. So Republicans may try to game plan this over the next 5 weeks, because they are going to need a blueprint for how to approach this issue when they return in the fall.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't look like something that's going to go away, though of course they'll be hoping that while they're out of town. You're watching Open Mic. We're talking about the Hill Nation Summit that took place last week, and we're trying to get into conversations on a bunch of different political issues. I want to shift subjects a little bit and turn back to Julia. One of the people that she interviewed at Hill Nation Summit was David Hogg, the 25-year-old activist who's really trying to shake up the Democratic Party, who's arguing that the old solutions they've been trying to use to fix their own party's problems and win elections aren't working anymore, that they need to listen to a new generation. A big theme of this year's summit was how do Democrats kind of get back off the floor and winning again. Julia, what was the most notable moments from you from that really illuminating interview you held with David Hogg about his thoughts on the Democratic Party and the country?
Well, first, I thought it was interesting, obviously, how open he was about, what happened between him and DNC chair Ken Martin, and I guess how in detail he went about his experience serving at the Democratic National Committee as a vice chair. David Hogg is someone who I actually remember covering when I was a breaking news reporter back in 2018. He's a Parkland school shooting survivor, and he became a major gun control activist, a co-founder of March for Our Lives. And that's how he's really gotten his foray into politics. And he's been seen as this rising Democratic star for quite some time. But earlier this year, I guess you could say he ran into some trouble when he launched his own group, Leaders We Deserve, while he was serving as DNC vice chair. And as a part of his work at Leaders We Deserve, his group said they would primary safe seat Democrats in an effort to elect younger Democrats, or Gen Z Democrats, or younger millennial Democrats to Congress. That obviously ruffled the feathers of the DNC, the DCCC, other, the Democratic Party apparatus. So him essentially, he clashed with them, and there were questions over his election, not pertaining to him, but there was questions about potential, sexism or gender bias when it came to the election of him and his fellow vice chair Malcolm Kenyatta. So those elections were essentially voided, and David Hogg said that he would no longer, he wouldn't run again for vice chair. So he parted ways with the establishment. And the big question for David Hogg, and we got into this, is what's next for him? And a lot of our conversation actually centered around Zohran Mamdani, the New York City Democratic mayoral candidate, who actually was in town that same day as we were holding the summit. Unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to talk with Mr. Mamdani, but we'll be covering him. David Hogg and Leaders We Deserved campaigned quite a bit with Mamdani in the Democratic primary. That was a huge win for David Hogg and his group, even though there were a lot of other groups working with Mamdani. So I thought it was interesting to hear his philosophy on that. It'd been, sort of the work that went into that race, but also the interview came after there was a very competitive, or what we thought could be a competitive House Democratic primary for former Congressman Raul Grijalva's seat. Grijalva passed away earlier this year. David Hogg had endorsed one Gen Z influencer running in that race, but most of the establishment, including progressives like Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ruben Gallego, Democrats of all stripes, were behind Raul Grijalva's daughter, Adelita, who won that race. So it was interesting, hearing David talk about, sort of deciding what races he wants to get involved with, what races he doesn't want to get involved in. I think
that surprised you about it, Julia? Was there anything he said that I didn't think he'd say that, or I didn't think he'd have that take?
Yeah, there was actually one moment during the interview where I asked him, this was definitely a zinger that sticks out to me. I asked him, what's one thing you're hopeful for? And I just didn't expect him to be this blunt. He said, I'm hopeful that I'm going to outlive most of the people who are against me. I
laughed when he said that. I thought it was funny.
Yeah,
he's probably going to outlive me, and I thought it was funny.
It was funny.
Getting into
a zinger, all right. A zinger for sure.
Yeah. So I thought that was definitely interesting to hear him say that, because obviously I think that's directed, and he directed a lot of, this wasn't him only criticizing Democrats, he was also criticizing Republicans as well. But I think we have some sound in which he talks about kind of why he thinks the Democratic philosophy of kind of not avoiding pissing off, or he said his words, not mine, pissing off David Hogg's words, the Democratic establishment is a bad idea. Lisa, I think we have that sound. Let's just play that.
Yes, it's going to be a video of all of our Democrats from the day.
Oh, excellent.
There is not a bipartisan piece of legislation that I've not been in the room on. And that goes back to the Trump first administration when we did the last COVID bill. It was the CHIPS bill. It was the infrastructure bill. It was a lot of the stuff in the IRA, the Electoral Count Act. There has been a core group of about 6 or 8 of us that have been involved in all of these. And matter of fact, anything that happened under Biden that was significant was bipartisan. I'd love to see that come back under President Trump's second term. You know, it's been hard. It's been a hard 6 months. Although I would argue, if you got, especially after a glass of wine, the vast majority of Republican senators who are not hardcore MAGA are having a pretty miserable time as well. The only bipartisan bill that's happened this year, and I was again in the middle of it for good or bad, was the stablecoin bill. I got 19 Democrats to go along on that. Not because I necessarily was a huge fan of crypto, but I think it's going to be here. I think stablecoins are going to be a piece of this, and I'd rather have American rules around it. And I think crypto does have a role to play. I think the challenge now after I would not call it beautiful, the big awful bill, really burnt through a lot of goodwill.
When Donald Trump campaigned, he said on day one, he's going to reduce inflation. He lied to the American people again. We saw inflation increase during his tenure this term. And again, it exceeded expectations last month, going to 2.7%, and core CPI increased even more to 2.9%. And then when you look at lots of everyday necessities, such as utilities, those are double-digit increases, and people understand the economy is not doing well under Trump and Republican policies. We're going to continue to highlight to voters across America in both blue and red districts the harm that the big ugly law is doing and why the economy is not doing well under Trump and Republican policies, unless you're a billionaire. If you're a billionaire, you're doing pretty well right now.
Typically, tectonically speaking, in a first midterm of a president. You know, my class was wiped out in 2010. I'm class of 08. We were wiped out in 2010. It just always happens.
Yeah.
If the Democratic Party can't take a House majority, that would be what, winning 6 seats or something? If we can't do that, then strip it for parts. And by the way, I'll be there helping strip it for parts because we've gotten something really wrong. I just don't think that that's the case. Now, there's 2 parties in this country of 350 million people, right? So yes, it is a little uncomfortable that, you know, my party includes, I guess, Kirsten Sinema and Mamdani or whatever.
Yeah.
But look at the other party. Like the other party includes Chip Roy and David Valadao and Fitzpatrick, who voted against, who was the only Republican who had the courage to vote against the big, beautiful bill.
How did we allow Donald Trump to win twice? Right. I mean, you know, we must have done something wrong as a party. Like, you can't argue that the party is succeeding when this person, Donald Trump, with the favorability he has, wins twice. Yep. And wins all 7 swing states. Second, total up all of the years. One of the tests I say is total up all the years that Donald Trump and JD Vance have in elective office, and total up all the years Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have in elective office. Yep. The people who are out there speaking for us have been in office since the 1970s, 1980s. And like the ones are the next generation, like Kamala Harris or Gavin Newsom, and there's like the late 1990s. JD Vance got elected in like 2020, right? AOC got elected in 2018. And so we've become affiliated with the status quo. And third, we became, for whatever reason, the party, the non-rebellious, the non-independent party. We became the party that said, we're going to tell you what to do and things are fine. And the Republicans became the party with the edge. I want to be part of the future conversation in this party. I believe we need a 21st century economic jobs vision in this country. How are we going to actually create 21st century jobs in every part of the country? I believe we need a new economic patriotism. Donald Trump's right. We need to bring manufacturing back, but he's not going to do it just by tariffs. We need to have federal investments. We need 1,000 trade schools. We need AI academies.
I think our number one philosophy as a default when it comes to how do we win is what raises us the most money and pisses off the fewest people and the entrenched political establishment. And the very same cast of characters that brought our party to this place, I don't care if they're in a super competitive seat or in a very deeply blue seat, the same cast who got us here are not who is going to get us out of here ultimately, right? Because those people And I've seen this in the work that we've done with Leaders We Deserve at multiple levels of government. We've had candidates before where we were prepared to spend over $500,000 on a candidate in a pretty red state that was in a seat that was critical to break a supermajority. And I got a call from the Democratic minority leader of that state legislature. And they said, well, we hear that your candidates, they don't take corporate money. Are you going to fund that candidate's campaign next election cycle? What that told me is that as a party, many of our leaders are more interested in keeping the power structures the same that got them there than actually challenging the status quo that could be overall collectively way more beneficial to all of us, but may potentially threaten their own position of power. Because right now, what I would counter those people with is if this is not the answer to address our 27% approval rating that we have with our own base, and the fact that people clearly feel like we are failing to be an opposition party, it's fine to disagree with this, but what the hell is your answer?
So one of the observations I think have now that I've watched that compilation all together, and I'm reminded of my conversation with David Hogg when I asked him, is the debate within the Democratic Party right now establishment versus progressive? Sometimes you loop in moderate versus progressive, or is it fight or flight against Donald Trump? And a number of progressives and even some moderates I've talked to, and Michael, you can definitely, I'm sure you can chime in on this from the legislative perspective, but a number of Democrats I've talked to have said this isn't a moderate versus progressive divide anymore. This is, are we going to fight back against Donald Trump, or are we going to essentially sit down and let him steamroll? I know that there's, Chuck Schumer took a lot of flack for voting for, voting to keep the government open earlier this year during a budget bill, I believe it was. So that's an example of it. So, I mean, David Hogg got into that a little bit. And I think from his perspective, I'm
kind of curious what Michael thinks about that, because I don't know that when someone says it's not a progressive versus centrist thing, I guess I'm a little suspicious. And
too.
It sure looks like that to me. And even the example you cited, the Schumer example, it seemed to me that Schumer was kind of taking the centrist, middle approach. Michael, do you think the Democratic Party is as reflected from what we heard last week, is it still sort of a battle between centrists and leftists, I shouldn't say leftists, progressives, or is it a center-left battle, or is it something that is becoming more complicated and, I don't know, generational or something else?
I mean, I certainly think that the center and the progressive debate is a big part of it. Look, we're seeing that play out right now in a different way, but still prevalent with Mamdani in New York City. A number of moderate Democrats, I've spoken to a handful of them, have expressed concerns about Mamdani there. And folks are saying, well, especially Republicans are particularly seizing on this and saying, well, Mamdani in New York City, that's your future Democrats. This is what Democrats want to trail towards. But that's not really the case, because there are a number of more moderate centrist Democrats up here in Washington who say that's not the way to do it. So I certainly think that the progressive and center debate is a layer of it, but there's surely an age part of it too. This new generation of leaders, we still hear plenty about it, something David Hogg was talking about with that zinger, Julia, that you had mentioned. It's something that we saw the Democratic Party go through about 2-3 years ago with Nancy Pelosi and her deputies handing the torch to Hakeem Jeffries. It's something that we saw play out with Joe Biden, of course, and his age concerns. And I think it's a lot about strategy. Democrats right now are so in the wilderness that they're still picking up the pieces and trying to find out what went wrong in 2024 and how to fix that and put them on a better trajectory come 2026. And then after that, 2028, what's the right strategy, right? Is it something like what Congresswoman MacIver did in New Jersey? Is it something like what Senator Padilla did in California, more of those confrontational things? Or is someone like Hakeem Jeffries having that 8-hour speech and more on the House floor? So I think that it's not just one part of this debate that's happening, because Democrats are in such a tough position right now. I think they're looking at everything, and that involves, ideology, it involves age, and it involves strategy. Last thing I'll say is I was in a press conference with Hakeem Jeffries just yesterday, and he was asked about this strategy moving forward, and his line, which he reiterated in the Capitol yesterday, was more is more. Democrats are trying to get to anything they can right now to break through, which is why I think it's so fascinating. And not to turn back to the Jeffrey Epstein conversation, but that is something that's resonating. That is something that has broken through in terms of substance and strategy. I mean, it's very procedural and wonky, but what House Democrats did this week in terms of shutting down the House floor for most of its business was genius. It was very smart and it was very effective. So I think that as Democrats look at this rebuilding period, which by the way, kind of has to start to end so they can start to ramp up for 2026 and 2028, they're looking at all of these different threads to try to figure out how to move forward.
Well, one thing I'm looking at, and I should remind viewers, you're watching Open Mic as we discuss the Hill Nation Summit. And we want to get to Republicans. We have a role of Republicans that we should definitely show, since we showed the role of Democrats. So we'll get ready to do that soon. Also, Lisa, let me know if there are any questions from the audience that we should get to. We promised that at the beginning.
I just wanted to remind everyone, if you have audience questions, please either send them to me in the chat. My name is Lisa Williams, or put them into the Q&A function, which you can find at the bottom of your Zoom bar, or if you're not seeing it, you can go into more and find it there.
Before we get to any of those questions, and before we get to the Republicans, I was struck by two things, Michael and Julia, about the Democratic speakers at the Hill Nation Summit. The first was several of them sort of complimented President Trump's political skills in a way that suggested they thought they needed to learn some stuff from him. Then secondly, Michael, you're talking about the wilderness and everything, and I don't disagree with you that, they don't have power in the House and Senate or the presidency. But, even watching that video, they don't lack for confidence. They seem to think that they are going to come back. Am I misreading that? Or is that accurate? Is that what you see too?
No, I think that's accurate. That's what I'm hearing from Democrats day in and day out in the Capitol. And look, the historical trends are certainly behind their back right now. Historically, the president's party has lost seats in the House and the Senate, especially the House, in the midterm election, right after they re-entered the White House. So Democrats are really bullish that that could happen in 2026. Not to mention the fact that they need to flip just, I believe, about 5 or 6 seats in the House, just about 3 seats in the Senate, in order to gain that majority. But they still have a lot of work to do. And I think that maybe something that's also prompting them to exude some confidence is Democrats have a bench. They have a lot of people who think they could be president tomorrow. In fact, they have a lot of people who I bet would have jumped into an open convention if that had happened following Joe Biden dropping out of the race. It's just a question of who's the right candidate for the moment and what's the right message for them. That's the thing. Democrats have to first figure out what went wrong in 2024. And it's not just the message that they need to hone in on come 2026 and 2028. It's the messenger. It's sort of twofold that are really key. But I mean, certainly Democrats are confident. I think it's also part of the game here in Washington that you have to exude that confidence and optimism. Certainly the historical trends are in their favor. But again, they still have a lot of work to do in terms of finding that message and that messenger.
I think before we were to jump to a 2026 or 2028, I know it's not as exciting, but we have 3 major off-year elections taking place in November. You have the Virginia gubernatorial race, House of Delegates also up for grabs, New Jersey gubernatorial race, and of course the New York City mayoral primary. And I think that'll be an interesting contrast because you have 2 moderates, Mikey Sherrill and Abigail Spanberger. I've covered Spanberger more, so I'll speak more to her. This candidate has never run in a safe district. She's never had an easy race. She is a moderate, and she knows how to win. She's running a very good campaign right now. Mikey Sherrill, also a moderate. So, both of those governor's races are lean Democratic. It's in their favor. But we know that in New York City's mayoral race, and I'm not comparing New York City to Virginia or New Jersey here, but you have Mamdani, a progressive, who is favored to win. So I am curious to see after these 3 elections what the I shouldn't say autopsy, but what the takeaways are. Does the party, do they take away more from the moderate or the progressive side? I mean, I think all three of these candidates, regardless of where they fall on that party spectrum or ideological spectrum, are all talking about costs and affordability in their own way. So that's a big takeaway. That's one thing I hear from Democrats across the board.
Speaking of affordability, we do have a couple of questions from the audience. I'm seeing them, Lisa, so I can probably just take a crack at reading one of them. Well, the first one's related to the big, beautiful bill, which Michael and Julia covered it a lot, but Michael was right there on the floor covering it on the House. Michael, the person watching wants to know, don't you believe that the cuts that were done to the average American in what they're calling the awful big bill will get the Dems the House in 2026?
Democrats are certainly hopeful, but what we hear a lot, well, let me first say, Democrats are certainly hopeful, but see, just taking it a step back, this big, beautiful bill is going to be the centerpiece of the 2026 midterm elections, any way you slice it, any way you look at it. Republicans are going to be in overdrive trying to sell the most popular parts of this bill: no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, extending those Trump 2017 tax cuts. They're going to be trying to sell those parts of the bill to their constituents to help them at the ballot box. But of course, on the flip side, you're going to see Democrats going toe to toe at the same time, trying to explain why or argue to their voters of why this was not a good thing and why this will hurt Americans, particularly focusing on those Medicaid cuts. So this is going to be the biggest thing. And now the key question is who's going to win out in that messaging battle? Will it be Democrats who are saying this is a harmful bill, or will it be Republicans saying that this was a masterpiece? We're going to see the beginning taste of that in next month, in August. As Ian mentioned, it's August recess. Lawmakers are heading home to their home districts and home states, where we're expecting a lot of town halls. We're going to have to see what the questions are about this bill and what the main takeaway is. Now, a big question I hear in the Capitol all the time is, was this bill too big for Republicans to effectively message? Something sort of like looking back to Obamacare during the Obama administration, when even after Obamacare passed, there was still a significant loss of seats for Democrats up on Capitol Hill. Sometimes when a bill is just too humongous, it's hard for members to message it. Now, Republican members of Congress are telling me that's not going to be the case, that they are going to be able to sell their points to the public of why this was a good thing. But certainly Democrats are going to be banking on that, saying that because this was too big, folks are going to focus on the Medicaid portions and not the other tax breaks. And for that reason, it's going to cause Democrats to gain seats and Republicans to lose seats. So we're going to have to see how this messaging battle plays out, but it is going to be fascinating. The fact that, and Ian, you could maybe speak to this if you've seen a situation like this similarly in the past, where candidates are focusing on the same exact issue, the same exact piece of legislation wholeheartedly, but from just completely different standpoints.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen it a few times, and by the way, I also think we've seen periods where one party has full control and it flips pretty quickly too, often because of big legislation gets passed and how it gets messaged. In fact, things flipped in 2022 and 2024 in part because of the failures, arguably, and messaging failures in policy from the Biden administration on some of the things they did. Democrats are really down in the dumps. The next question we have from our audience kind of gets at that. A lot of what we've been writing about, a lot of what we tried to cover at the Hill Summit is how Democrats are, kind of in this existential crisis, trying to figure out how they can come back. The question comes from Randy Goldstein, and she writes, as a political activist and community mobilizer, I have a hard time believing Dems can stop Trump. What do they need to do to restore our faith? Talking about Democratic voters. Julia, you want to take a crack at that one, given the talks you had with Hogg and other Democrats?
Well, I think the one thing I hear when I have that conversation with, in particular Democratic operatives and strategists, and I think obviously they're in a unique situation right now, but you can probably go back to past, post-election cycles and see a similar dynamic playing out. They don't have a leader. Republicans have Donald Trump in the White House. He is the president of the United States. He is a unifying figure. Democrats don't have that. A DNC chair, even though, yes, Ken Martin is technically the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, your average voter does not look, or activist does not look to Ken Martin as the leader of the party. Instead, what you have right now are a number of these Democrats, whether it's Zohran Mamdani, well, actually, I'll put Mamdani in his own category, but a number of Democrats, like, let's say California Governor Gavin Newsom, for example, he's, I'm going to name off some potential 2028 contenders. They're dipping their toes in the water, if you will, really trying to take a temperature of where the base is. And also where the general public is right now, and trying to figure out how to message going from there. You have Gavin Newsom doing it with this podcast. I think Andy Beshear, the governor of Kentucky, has a podcast. You have Pete Buttigieg and Wes Moore going around holding these town halls. I mean, obviously, these are potential 2028 contenders, but they're also, I think.
Let me cut to the chase here, though, Julia. You think they can restore the faith? You think
Do
doing those
I
things like
think
that will restore the faith for people who've lost it in the Democratic Party?
I don't know. I don't know. And I think it depends on the message. I think it depends on ultimately what message they ultimately go with. And I think they're trying to figure out.
One thing that restores faith is winning. One thing
What's
that restores faith is winning. One
Yes,
thing that
winning.
restores faith is winning.
Yes,
It's a little bit like sports that way, politics.
definitely. So, I mean, we'll see. I mean, like I said, I think if to bring Mamdani back into the conversation, I think he is exciting the base in many ways. So I'm not saying he's going to, run for president, but I think he's maybe, giving a much needed boost to them at a time when they don't really have it.
Well, I think I do want to get to that Republican video in part because we're a nonpartisan site and we ran the Democratic one. I think I'm stealing Michael's thunder and that she was supposed to intro this.
Take it away.
Okay, thanks for your permission.
We'll let you do a joint toss.
Yeah. If we get that, let's hear what they had to say at the Hill Nation Summit.
Chairman Jason Smith. He was one of the first people, if not the very first person in Congress to advocate for one bill. It was going to be real easy to get a border bill and a military bill that was advocated by many in Congress, House and Senate, and some in the White House. But he knew if we were going to get a tax bill, make the tax code permanent, the things that we got out of this bill, that was going to happen at one time. And time again, those in the media thought we'd never get it done. We got it done with funding the government. We got it done with the budget reconciliation language. We got it done with the final passage of the bill. Did I get everything I wanted? No, but nobody did. Not the president, not anybody in Congress, House or Senate. And that's why it looked a little ugly at times.
I say all the time, Michigan is open for business, but we are not for sale. Under President Trump, America is open for business, but we are not for sale. He's brought hundreds of billions of dollars of investment and commitments back to the United States of America, just on leveling the playing field. But you know what's not working? The status quo. I was in 8th grade when NAFTA was signed. And since then, over 300,000 automotive manufacturing jobs have been hemorrhaged from Michigan, just in Michigan. You cannot trade your way to prosperity exclusively. We have to build things in America, and President Trump understands this. This is not just an economic argument. This is also a national security argument. This is also how we are able to defend ourselves, provide for our families, and be able to give that purpose and the opportunity for people to pursue the American dream.
It is the largest, most comprehensive set of reforms, tax, fiscal, welfare, security investment, energy deregulation in the history of the country. And I think it will go well for our economy. I think it will go well for communities across the land. So I'm very proud of what we did. It's not perfect, never is, but I think that Reagan 80-20 was met. As the budget chair, I always want to do more on the fiscal reform side and restoring fiscal health to the country, which is just off the rails. And we can talk a little bit more about that. But to have a $1.5 trillion reduction in spending, 2 times the most in the history of our country, to put the policies in place to create the conditions for economic growth, which is a big part of bringing the debt and deficit to GDP down, is no small thing.
If you look at history, the way we study presidents, do you ever sit down and say, that one president accomplished a lot, but I didn't like his personality. No one ever studies that. They study what you're able to accomplish. He could have been everybody's friend, but nothing would have changed. That's not why they elected him. And being in his second term, knowing he can't do a third term, that is what to me is extraordinary, that he knows that so he doesn't waste any time. And he was able to build on the successes he had in the first term. When President Trump, we didn't win the re-election, do you know how many Democrats or how many Republican incumbents in the House lost that year? 0. That hasn't happened since 1994. And Biden comes in and wins, but he loses 13 seats. Unheard of, right? This cycle, President Trump wins the popular vote. You know, the last time a Republican did that was 30 some years ago, but they lost seats in the House. So they actually underperformed where the president was at. Had he had a few more seats, he could do the things even faster.
President Trump does what he says. You know, I always say we make the job way too complicated. It's pretty simple. What'd you tell the voters you were going to do when you ran for it, when you put your name on the ballot? If you get elected, go do what you said. No one in my lifetime in politics in our lifetimes has done it better than President Trump. You just look at the first 7 months. He said he would secure the border. He did, right? He said Iran's not going to get a nuclear weapon. We had this amazing, successful operation by our military, took out Iran's nuclear capabilities. He said NATO should ante up more money. Well, Shazam, they anteed up more money when he went and talked to him. He said we were going to cut taxes and get the big, beautiful bill passed. We did.
Look, I get it. When people run for election and people are in office, it's great to give everything to everyone. But the truth of the matter is the federal government is no different than any family or any business. You have to set priorities. You have to live within your means. And if we can actually accomplish that here, it will mean a much more stable economic outlook for the entire United States. We've been downgraded now by all three rating agencies, all three. They don't talk about politics when they do their credit downgrades. They don't talk about Fed chairmen when they do their credit downgrades. What do they talk about? The inability of the federal government to live within its fiscal means. That's what the credit rating agencies talk about. That's my bigger frustration than any Fed chairman.
Well, you got a taste of something from those clips that I noticed, at least at the Senate last week, and that is not a surprising observation, Julia and Michael, but boy, oh boy, are Republicans in line with President Trump. They are, when they are being interviewed, they are really making a point of pledging their allegiance to the commander in chief and showing pretty much total loyalty to what he's saying. This has definitely become Trump's party, and even though we've seen some division on Epstein, and even in Donald's interview, you arguably saw that he doesn't think Powell should necessarily be fired, but those are kind of the exceptions, right?
Yeah, it's really fascinating how close Republicans have latched themselves on to President Trump. And I mean, I see this firsthand in the Capitol every day, particularly over the past 6 months when Republicans were trying to push through this big, beautiful bill. Speaker Johnson arguably could not have got it done without Donald Trump. At essentially every juncture of this process, this was how it went down. Hardline conservatives raised fierce concerns with the legislation at hand. They said they needed more days to work through their concerns, that they would never in a million years in any circumstances support that bill in its current form. And then the phone would ring and it would be President Trump, or they would take a trip down Pennsylvania Avenue to the White House, have a meeting with the president, and shortly thereafter, lo and behold, those Republicans would vote in favor of the legislation. President Trump, I mean, folks called him the closer. He truly was. It's just this fear, it seems to be, among Republicans to cross the president and threaten his agenda or threaten the ire and the wrath. Look, we saw it.
I agree, Michael. I mean, like back in March, when do you think, what were the odds for you of them getting this done by July 4th, looking back at March?
I mean, if I'm being honest with you, which isn't a great thing for me to say right now, I didn't think in a million years they would get it done. I really thought they would need some more time just because of these stark concerns that they had, the fact that the Senate was signaling that it was going to change the bill substantially in a lot of ways to make it less conservative. And I just didn't think that Republicans would swallow that, given all this emphasis and sort of talk about this bill, how it was so important. Republicans were going to want to make it as conservative as they could, but I was proven wrong. A lot of folks were proven wrong. Vice President J.D. Vance was proven wrong. In the cabinet room a few days later, he said, I got to be honest with you, Mr. President, didn't really see this one happening by July 4th. It's just the sheer power of Trump and the threat and the fear of his wrath. And I mean, again, I feel like I'm a broken record, not to go back to the Jeffrey Epstein thing again, but that's why what makes it so fascinating, this current story, is that these Republicans are deliberately going against Trump. We really haven't seen this happen in in any other instance in the past 6 months, which is why it's so fascinating, because Republicans revere President Trump, and there was just such a fear and non-interest in crossing him.
I mean, I took a vacation July 4th, first vacation of the year, I think, for me.
Good
Well
for you.
deserved.
I was so sure that they weren't going to be in session doing this. You know, and I think you're right about the fear. The next question we have from our audience kind of gets at that a little bit too. It comes from a Democratic perspective, clearly. The person who's sending in the question wants to remain anonymous. Why don't Democrats spend more time and energy reminding voters that Republicans are blindly enforcing corruption and competence in the White House, and how un-American and unprecedented that is? That's certainly coming from a voter or a reader who is a Democrat and who's kind of upset with the lack of fight they seem to be seeing from the Democrats so far in their view. But what do you think, Julia? Why do you think Democrats are spending a lot of time and energy, really hitting Republicans for sort of arguably blindly following Trump and the various examples people could point to of arguable incompetence in the administration? I'm trying not to associate myself with the views because I want to be neutral, but we know Signalgate and some other things. That's where the criticisms came from Democrats in particular.
You're seeing it. I'm sort of reminded of Senator Bernie Sanders and Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez fighting the oligarchy tour that they did earlier this year. I think, I don't think it's still going on, but it was earlier this year. It drew, tens of thousands of people, in the various stops they did. So I think you see it there. I thought, Cory Booker is another example of someone with his marathon, 25-hour speech on the Senate floor earlier this year. Those three I've heard a lot in conversations when it comes to how, examples of how Democrats should fight back against the Trump administration. Another person, Chris Van Hollen, especially during the, debate or the, saga of involving Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Maryland man who was deported, by the Trump administration. Him, getting on that flight, going to El Salvador was praised by a lot of progressives, even non-progressive Democrats as well. I think Robert Garcia, and Michael can speak to this more, the now chairman of the House Oversight Committee, he, as well as I cover Florida a lot, Congressman Maxwell Frost from the Orlando area, I hear their names brought up as, Democrats who are pushing back through, legislation they're introducing or, through acts like, I think they also went to El Salvador. So those are the examples I've heard, I think, most frequently.
Okay. We're getting a lot of questions from the audience, so I want to try to get a couple more before we likely close at the end of the hour. One is, it's partly a comment, but I think it's an interesting comment, and it goes to the beginning of our conversation. It comes from Mike. He says, I was a little surprised that Ian opened with the claim that the first 6 months have been successful, quote unquote, for Trump. Every time I see POTUS on TV, he looks like he's either in a panic or throwing a tantrum. If that's a result of his success, again, quote unquote, what would a failure be looking like? I'm going to try to turn this to Michael and Julia. I think I use the word success because I think Trump feels like a lot of the things that he has wanted to do have gone forward. Legislatively, that bill was a big deal for them. And as we said a few minutes ago, I thought they'd get the tax cuts through because people don't want to be in Congress and raise taxes, but I was surprised that they got this full big package through as quickly as they did. And I guess I'm kind of surprised too at the level of, again, success. I don't mean success as being a pejorative for agreeing with policy. I don't mean it for disagreeing with policy. Success is when you have a list of things and you're trying to get them done. I've been surprised by how forcefully they've been able to move various things through the administrative state, and how the courts have not been a bulwark to them, in part, of course, because we have a 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court, and that's been real a key for Trump so far. But Michael, what do you think about the substance of that? Am I wrong to be using the word success? And you can disagree with me. I know I'm your supervisor. I know I'm your editor, but you can disagree. It's okay.
Despite being given a free pass to disagree with my boss right now, I am not going to take it because I don't disagree with you. Look, Republicans came in, actually, Donald Trump came in with this long list of legislative agenda, priorities, wish list, whatever you want to call it, that he wanted to get done domestically. The majority of that is in that bill, is in that big, beautiful bill. Whether you like it or not, President Trump was able to get it over the finish line in a very, very condensed timeline. He was able to get the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, which took a sledgehammer to the federal government, and a lot of those cuts were just locked in by Congress. So, again, whether you agree with it or don't agree with it, he's gotten a lot of the things that he said he would get done in these first 6 months, and that big, beautiful bill was the vehicle for it. Now, will that come back to bite him? Will it end up hurting Republicans in the 2026 midterms? Maybe. We're going to have to see. That's, of course, the big question over the next year and a half. But Trump came in with a lot of things he wanted to get done, and a majority of them rode on that big, beautiful bill. So when you just talk about it, substance of him, like you mentioned, getting done what he wanted to achieve, I think you have to call it a success, especially given the fact that it happened in such a quick time frame.
Another comment / question from the audience is coming from a reader who says that they think the Democrats are going to have to get as mean, all capital letters, as the Republicans. They don't play nice or fair. They have to go low now. It's interesting. I think there's plenty of Democrats that probably feel that way, Julia. And we're seeing some examples of Democrats throwing some dirt with the Epstein controversy a bit, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you have Hakeem Jeffries really wanting to wade into this, and other House Democrats wanting to wade into this. I mean, Democrats, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, prior to this, I don't think they were very vocal about the Jeffrey Epstein controversy. Maybe from time to time they would chide Trump for formerly being associated with him, but they weren't really taking part in the conspiracy theories or the theories surrounding Jeffrey Epstein. Now they're much closer to that. And I think it's definitely an example of them really obviously trying to fight back, hit back. Another name I thought of, because I think I brought up Chris Van Hollen, Cory Booker, AOC, Bernie Sanders. Chris Murphy is another Democrat who I think is emblematic of, someone who is maybe embracing that fight versus flight attitude and really, sticking it to President Trump. I am curious, though, there are a number of closely watched Democratic primaries this upcoming cycle. You have one in Michigan, a major toss-up state that's going to be likely a bloody Senate or primary, I don't want to say bloody, but contentious Senate primary forming. And I think you're going to see I'm curious to see how Democratic primary voters in a state like Michigan kind of make their preference known. I mean, are they going to, is this part of their criteria, if that makes sense? I'm also reminded of Texas as well. Obviously, the Republican Senate primary in Texas is a big one involving incumbent Senator John Cornyn, but there is a brewing Democratic primary, and I don't think necessarily former Congressman Colin Allred is a shoo-in necessarily. You have other Democrats who are thinking about jumping in and, sort of testing the waters and, once again, voicing this fight versus flight idea. So I think primaries are a good place where we're going to see a lot of this debate play out.
Michael, do you think the Democrats are ready to get mean and think they need to get mean to kind of move forward a little bit? Does that the equation?
I think they kind of are a little bit right now with this Epstein story. I mean, at least on Capitol Hill. And again, it's very wonky, it's procedural, but what Democrats did this week in the House was pretty mean. It was pretty dirty, essentially blocking Republicans into a corner, leaving them, Republicans on the Rules Committee, unable to advance a procedural rule. But it's an embarrassment up on Capitol Hill, especially because the Rules Committee is supposed to be, it's the Speaker's Committee. It's supposed to do what the Speaker and leadership wants. Business was largely brought to a halt. So, I mean,
both parties do this when the other's in charge, and that's the whole game, right? You want to
absolutely,
screw them up.
Sure, but seeing Democrats seize on that this time around, or even yesterday, there was a small, quiet oversight subcommittee hearing that people weren't really paying attention to. But Republicans during that hearing brought a vote on subpoenaing the Epstein files, the very thing that Speaker Johnson has sent members home early to try to prevent, and it ended up going through. So sort of maybe it's not dirty, but maybe it's just sort of working a little smart out of the box, unconventionally, trying to use some procedural gambits to their advantage. It's been effective, and it's been achieving the things that Republicans have been trying to avoid this week.
Yeah, I mean, one person's dirty as another person's effective and smart when it comes to politics, that's for sure. You've been watching the Hill Open Mic. My name's Ian Swanson. Again, I'm the managing editor of the Hill. It's been my pleasure to be holding a discussion with Julia Manchester and Michael Schnell, two of the Hill's best reporters. Very proud to work with them every day. We've been talking about last week's Hill Nation Summit. We're looking forward to doing it again. And I think we're going to close this up. If I can flip to you, Lisa. Thanks so much to those of you who spent an hour or parts of an hour of your day with us.
Thank you all for joining us. That's all from us. Please look for us at thehill.com/events for future events and open mic sessions to join. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.